I was never the loud one. I wasn't the person who raised their hand first, or pushed their way to the front, or made sure everyone heard their opinion. I learned early that silence kept the peace. Silence avoided conflict. Silence made people comfortable. At least, that's what I told myself. For a long time, my silence felt like strength. I believed it showed maturity. I believed it meant I was patient, understanding, resilient. When someone crossed a line, I stayed quiet. When someone took credit for my work, I swallowed the frustration. When I was treated unfairly, I convinced myself it wasn't worth the fight. What I didn't realize back then was that people weren't respecting my silence. They were using it. At first, it was subtle, almost invisible. Small moments that were easy to dismiss. Someone interrupting me mid-sentence. Someone deciding for me without asking. Someone speaking about me instead of to me. I noticed it, but I brushed it off. I didn't want to seem difficult. I didn't want to create tension. So I stayed quiet. And slowly, my silence became permission. Permission for people to step over me. Permission to take advantage of my kindness. Permission to rewrite my story without my consent. There were moments when my chest burned with words I wanted to say. Moments when my heart raced and my hands shook because something was deeply unfair. But every time, I told myself the same lie. Stay calm. Be the bigger person. It'll pass. But it didn't pass. It grew. The more silent I became, the louder everyone else got. Decisions were made without me. Boundaries were crossed like they never existed. My efforts were expected, but my presence was optional. I was useful, but invisible. And the worst part? People started to assume I agreed with everything. Because silence looks like consent to those who benefit from it. I remember one specific moment that changed how I saw everything. It wasn't traumatic. There was no shouting, no confrontation, just a quiet realization that hit me harder than any argument ever could. I was sitting in a room full of people who knew me well, or at least I thought they did. They were talking about a decision that directly affected my life. My name came up. My future was being discussed. And no one looked at me. They spoke as if I wasn't there. I waited. I thought someone would ask my opinion. I thought someone would pause and say, "What do you think?" But they didn't. They continued, confident, comfortable, unbothered. That's when it hit me. My silence hadn't made me respected. It had made me irrelevant. That night, I went home and replayed years of memories in my head. Every time I had stayed quiet when something felt wrong. Every time I chose peace over truth. Every time I convinced myself that speaking up would only make things worse. I realized something painful. The cost of my silence had been far greater than the cost of speaking up ever would be. But even then, I didn't change overnight. Fear doesn't disappear just because you understand it. I was afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of being judged, afraid of losing relationships, afraid that if I finally spoke up, people would see a version of me they didn't like. Because when you stay silent for too long, people get comfortable with the version of you that doesn't challenge them. And the moment you change, they call it a problem. I tested my voice in small ways at first. A sentence here, a correction there. Nothing aggressive, nothing emotional, just honest. And the reactions shocked me. Some people laughed it off. Some ignored it completely. Some looked annoyed, as if I had broken an unspoken rule. That rule being, you don't get to speak now. That's when I understood something crucial. They didn't take advantage of my silence by accident. They depended on it because my silence made their lives easier. And the moment I stopped being silent, I became inconvenient. There was pushback. Subtle at first. Passive comments. Changed tones. The way conversations suddenly ended when I walked in. The way people began to describe me as different. "You've changed," they said. What they really meant was, "You're no longer controllable." I won't lie. There were moments I almost went back to being silent. Moments when the loneliness felt heavier than the injustice. Moments when I questioned whether my voice was worth the discomfort it caused. But then something happened. I spoke up about something that truly mattered. Not calmly, not politely, not cautiously. Honestly. And for the first time in my life, I didn't apologize for it. The room went quiet, not the awkward kind of quiet. The heavy kind. The kind where people realize they've gone too far. The kind where the balance shifts. I said everything I had held in for years. Not with anger, but with clarity. Not to attack, but to reclaim myself. And in that moment, I felt something I had never felt before. Relief. Because no matter how people reacted after that, I had finally chosen myself. Some people didn't like it. Some people distanced themselves. Some tried to twist my words. But something unexpected happened. Others listened. Others respected me more. Others admitted they had crossed lines they never thought I would challenge. And that's when I understood the truth that changed my life. Silence doesn't protect you. It only delays the damage. Your voice is not a weapon. It's a boundary. And the people who benefit from your silence are rarely the ones who deserve it. For years, they took advantage of my silence. Until the day I finally spoke up. And nothing was ever the same after that. When you live in silence for long enough, it doesn't feel like silence anymore. It feels normal. That's the dangerous part. I didn't wake up one day and decide to disappear inside myself. It happened slowly, almost gently, like water shaping stone. Each moment of staying quiet felt small, harmless, justified. Each time I told myself it wasn't worth speaking up, I thought I was choosing maturity. I thought I was choosing peace. But peace built on self-erasure isn't peace at all. It's surrender. The fear of speaking up didn't come from nowhere. It was learned, conditioned, reinforced over time. Every environment I was in seemed to reward silence and punish honesty. When I spoke my mind as a child, I was called dramatic. When I questioned something as a teenager, I was told I was being disrespectful. When I expressed discomfort as an adult, I was labeled difficult. So I adapted. I learned to read rooms instead of expressing myself. I learned to anticipate reactions instead of stating needs. I learned to keep thoughts locked inside until they lost their shape, and people liked that version of me. They liked that I was agreeable, that I didn't push back, that I absorbed discomfort quietly, that I carried emotional weight without asking anyone else to help hold it. Over time, my role became clear. I was the reliable one, the understanding one, the one who would get over it. That role came with invisible expectations. If someone was overwhelmed, I was expected to adjust. If someone crossed the line, I was expected to forgive. If something hurt me, I was expected to endure. And because I never objected loudly, people assumed I was fine. That assumption became my prison. What most people don't talk about is how silence changes the way you see yourself. When you constantly dismiss your own feelings to make room for others, you start believing your feelings don't matter. When you swallow your words long enough, you forget how to speak them clearly. When you allow others to define the narrative, you lose touch with your own truth. I didn't just stop speaking up. I stopped trusting myself. There were moments when I felt anger, but I questioned it. Moments when I felt hurt, but I minimized it. Moments when something felt deeply wrong, but I told myself I was being too sensitive. Gaslighting doesn't always come from other people. Sometimes you learn to do it to yourself. The psychological cost of that is enormous. I became hyper-aware of everyone else's emotions while being completely disconnected from my own. I could sense tension in a room instantly. I could predict moods. I could adjust my behavior to keep things smooth. But inside, I felt hollow because none of that awareness was directed inward. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know what I needed. I didn't even know what I felt half the time. Only knew how to avoid conflict. And avoiding conflict became my identity. But conflict avoided doesn't disappear. It just RELOCAT, it moved into my body, into my thoughts, into my sleep. I was tired all the time. Not physically, emotionally. A deep exhaustion that rest didn't fix. Because rest doesn't heal a life lived against yourself. There were nights I replayed conversations in my head, imagining what I should have said. Perfect responses that came hours too late. Boundaries I wished I had drawn. Words I rehearsed but never delivered. That internal dialogue became constant. A quiet war between who I was and who I pretended to be. The breaking point didn't come as a single explosion. It came as accumulation. 1,000 tiny compromises stacked on top of each other until the weight became unbearable. One day, someone took advantage of me in a way that crossed a line I could no longer justify. It wasn't traumatic on the surface. No shouting. No obvious betrayal. Just a clear, undeniable moment where my silence was used against me. They made a decision that benefited them and harmed me. And they did it confidently, comfortably, assuming I wouldn't object, because I never had before. I felt something shift inside me then. Not anger, not sadness, not clarity. I saw the pattern, not just in that moment, but across years. How my silence had taught people how to treat me. How every unspoken boundary became an open door. How every swallowed objection became an invitation. And I realized something that terrified me. If I didn't speak up now, I never would. That realization didn't make it easier. It made it scarier. Because once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to ignorance. You can't pretend you don't know the cost. I started noticing how often I abandoned myself to keep others comfortable. How quickly I dismissed my own needs. How instinctively I prioritized harmony over honesty. Speaking up meant challenging all of that. It meant risking rejection. It meant risking conflict. It meant risking the loss of relationships built on my compliance. And that's what people don't tell you. When you stop being silent, you don't just find your voice. You find out who is only listening because you never spoke. The first real boundary I set felt unnatural. My heart pounded. My voice shook. I rehearsed the sentence 100 times before saying it. And when I finally did, the response wasn't what I expected. There was no understanding, no apology, no reflection. There was defensiveness. They minimized my feelings, questioned my perspective, suggested I was overreacting. They reminded me of how easygoing I used to be, how things had always worked fine before. That's when it hit me. Fine for them had meant silent for me, and silence had never been fine. Setting boundaries didn't make me feel empowered immediately. It made me feel exposed, vulnerable, raw, because for the first time, I was visible. And visibility is risky. When people are used to your invisibility, there were consequences. Some relationships changed permanently. Some people pulled away. Some tried to reassert control by guilt or pressure. Some treated my voice as betrayal. That hurt. I won't pretend it. DIDN single quotes T. Losing people you thought cared about you hurts deeply, especially when the only thing you changed was choosing honesty over silence. But here's what surprised me. The pain of losing them was still lighter than the pain of losing myself, because for the first time, my actions aligned with my truth, and that alignment brought a quiet strength I had never known. I started speaking up more, not aggressively, not constantly, but intentionally. One chose my moments. I chose clarity. I chose honesty, even when my voice trembled. And slowly, something shifted. People began to treat me differently. Not everyone, but enough to notice. Some respected me more. Some listened more carefully. Some adjusted their behavior. Some admitted they hadn't realized how much they'd taken for granted. And the ones who didn't, they revealed themselves. They became uncomfortable, dismissive, resistant, because my voice disrupted a dynamic that had benefited them. And that was information I needed. Silence hides truth. Speech reveals it. I began to understand that speaking up isn't about winning arguments. It's about self-respect. It's about refusing to participate in your own erasure. It's about acknowledging that your perspective matters, even if it makes others uncomfortable, especially if it makes others uncomfortable. The fear never fully disappeared. I still felt nervous before difficult conversations. I still questioned myself sometimes. But the difference was, I no longer let fear decide for me. I spoke anyway, and with each time I did, my voice grew steadier, my boundaries clearer, my sense of self stronger. I stopped apologizing for having needs. I stopped explaining myself endlessly. I stopped shrinking to fit spaces that refused to expand. I learned something powerful. Silence is easy in the short term, but it's expensive in the long run. It costs you your confidence, your clarity, your sense of worth. Speaking up costs something too, but what it gives you in return is priceless. Integrity, self-trust, freedom. They took advantage of my silence for years, not always maliciously, sometimes unconsciously, sometimes conveniently. But the moment I finally spoke up, the rules changed. And even though it wasn't easy, it was necessary, because no one else is coming to speak for you. And the longer you wait, the harder it becomes. There comes a moment in every quiet life when silence stops being protection and starts being betrayal. Not betrayal of others, betrayal of yourself. For me, that moment didn't arrive with drama or confrontation. It arrived quietly, late at night, when the noise of the world finally died down and I was left alone with my thoughts. No distractions, no roles to play, no one to please, just me and the truth I had been avoiding. I realized that even after I had started speaking up, even after setting boundaries, even after losing people, there was still a deeper layer of silence inside me. A silence I had internalized so deeply that it felt like part of my personality. It wasn't just that I stayed quiet when others crossed lines. I stayed quiet with myself. I avoided admitting how much damage had been done. I avoided naming the grief, the anger, the resentment. I avoided mourning the years I had given away trying to be acceptable instead of authentic. Because grief is heavier when it has no villain. And my story didn't have one clear enemy. No single person ruined my voice. That it was shaped by 1,000 moments, 1,000 dismissals, 1,000 times choosing peace over truth, and coming to terms with that meant accepting responsibility, not blame, responsibility. That was harder than pointing fingers, because it meant acknowledging acknowledging that silence had once felt safer than honesty, that I had chosen it because I didn't believe my voice would be welcome, that I had learned somewhere along the way that love came with permissions not be easy. Be agreeable. Don't be too much. Those rules had guided my life without my consent. And now, breaking them felt like stepping into unknown territory without a map. The hardest part of speaking up wasn't the external conflict. It was the internal rewiring. Learning to pause and ask myself what I actually felt before responding. Learning to tolerate discomfort instead of immediately smoothing it over. Learning that being misunderstood was survivable. At first, my body reacted before my mind could catch up. My heart raced when I expressed disagreement. My hands trembled when I held my ground. My stomach tightened when I didn't immediately apologize. It felt wrong, because silence had been rewarded for so long that honesty felt like danger, but danger didn't come. What came instead was something unfamiliar. Relief. Not the kind that floods you all at once. The kind that settles slowly, like a weight being lifted inch by inch. The kind you notice weeks later when you realize you're breathing easier, sleeping deeper, thinking more clearly. I hadn't realized how much energy it took to stay silent, how much mental space was consumed by self-monitoring, how much emotional labor went into making sure everyone else felt comfortable. Speaking up freed that energy. I began to invest it in myself, started listening inward instead of outward. I noticed my own reactions, my preferences, my limits. Things I had ignored for so long began to surface. I realized I didn't like certain dynamics I had tolerated. I realized I had opinions I had never voiced. I realized I had needs I had never named. And with each realization came a choice. Stay quiet and preserve familiarity, or speak and step into truth. I chose truth more often than not perfectly, not bravely every time, but consistently enough to change the trajectory of my life. Some days were harder than others. There were moments when old patterns resurfaced, when I stayed silent out of habit and later felt the familiar sting of regret. But instead of judging myself, I learned to notice it, to ask why, to understand what fear had been triggered. Fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of being seen as difficult. Those fears didn't vanish. They softened, because each time I spoke up and survived, they lost some of their power. I began to see how many relationships had been built around my silence, how much of my role had been defined by what I didn't say. And I also began to see something else. Some people were capable of growing with me. They listened. They adjusted. They respected my boundaries, even when it was uncomfortable. Those relationships deepened, became more honest, more mutual. Others couldn't. They resisted. They pushed back. They framed my growth as a problem. Those relationships faded, and that hurt, but it also clarified, because real connection doesn't require self-erasure. The day I truly understood, that was the day I stopped trying to explain myself to everyone. I stopped chasing understanding from people who benefited from misunderstanding me. I stopped negotiating my worth. There was one conversation in particular that marked the final shift. Someone who had taken advantage of my silence for years tried to cross a boundary I had clearly stated. When I reinforced it calmly, they laughed. Not cruelly, casually, as if my boundary was a suggestion, not a line, and something inside me settled. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't justify myself. I didn't argue. I simply repeated my boundary and removed myself from the situation. No apology. No explanation. Just action. Walking away felt surreal. like watching someone else move my body. My legs carried me forward, while my mind caught up. I expected guilt, panic, regret. Instead, I felt grounded. For the first time, I trusted myself completely. That moment wasn't dramatic. No one applauded. No one acknowledged it. The world didn't stop, but internally, something fundamental shifted. I was no longer waiting for permission to exist fully. Understood then that speaking up isn't about being loud. It's about being aligned. It's about knowing where you end and others begin. It's about honoring your internal signals, even when no one else validates them. Especially then. Silence had once kept me safe. Or so I believed. But safety without self-respect is fragile. It collapses under pressure. It requires constant sacrifice. Voice, on the other hand, builds resilience, not because it guarantees good outcomes, but because it guarantees integrity. I stopped measuring my success by how little trouble I caused. I stopped equating kindness with self-denial. I stopped believing that my needs were negotiable. And with that shift came a new kind of confidence, not arrogance. Not dominance. Quiet confidence. The kind that doesn't need approval. The kind that doesn't explain itself. The kind that stands firm without aggression. I became more selective about where I invested energy, about who had access to me, about which conversations deserved my voice. And paradoxically, the less I spoke out of obligation, the more my words mattered when I did speak. People listened differently, not because I demanded it, but because I meant what I said. The greatest irony is that speaking up didn't make my life louder. It made it calmer. Because there was no longer an internal argument running beneath everything. No suppressed resentment. No constant self-editing. Just clarity. I wasn't perfect. I still stumbled, still hesitated, still felt fear, but fear no longer dictated my choices. I had learned that silence is not neutral. It teaches others how to treat you. It teaches yourself how much you're willing to tolerate. And breaking that pattern doesn't happen overnight. It happens one sentence at a time, one boundary at a time, one uncomfortable truth at a time. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in my story, I want you to know something. You're not weak for staying silent. You learned it for a reason. Maybe it kept you safe once. Maybe it protected you when you had no other tools. But what protected you then might be limiting you now. And you don't have to transform all at once. Start small. Name one feeling honestly. Set one boundary gently. Speak one truth calmly. Your voice doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be yours. They took advantage of my silence because silence made it easy. But the moment I finally spoke up, I reclaimed something I didn't even realize. I had lost myself. And that is something no one can ever take from me again. If this story resonated with you, it's not by accident. Somewhere inside you, there's a voice waiting to be heard. It doesn't need to shout. It just needs space. Give it that space. Because the world doesn't change when you stay silent. But your life does when you stop.